Now is former CKE restaurant CEO, former Labor Secretary nominee, and the capitalist comeback author, Andy Puzder. Good to see you, Andy. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Good to be here, Maria.
It's interesting to see so many of these billionaires, corporate chiefs coming out and trying to change capitalism because of this constant, consistent inequality. And now you've got Ray Dalio coming out with his new plans for that, as well as Jamie Dimon, others as well. What's your take on all of this?
Well, first of all, part of the problem is how they measure income inequality. They look at pre-tax income, so they don't consider the effect of taxes on people that are wealthy, and then they look at lower incomes without social benefits, so social welfare benefits. So really, you could tax the wealthy 100% and distribute all of it to people at the bottom of the income scale. And the way they are measuring income inequality, it wouldn't affect income inequality at all, because they don't consider taxes and they don't consider welfare benefits. The second problem is they're ignoring the impact that a growing economy is having on income inequality today. You know, your prior guests have talked about the unemployment rate being at near historic lows, a 50-year low. We've got unemployment claims for unemployment benefits at a series low. We've got job openings at a series high. So we've had 8 straight months of 3% plus wage growth year over year. And if you look at lower income individuals, such as those in retail, hotel, and restaurants, it's been more like 5%. It's now harder to find blue-collar workers than it is to find white-collar workers. So we are seeing wages lifted from the bottom, which is really the only way to effectively reduce income inequality, is to increase wages at the bottom more than wages increase at the top. And that's what we're seeing with this economic growth.
Well, I want to ask you about that because of this fight for $15 an hour. But first, watch Ray Dalio on 60 Minutes last night making his point that, yes, capitalism has helped him, but now it needs to change. Watch.
I think the American dream is lost. I think, for the most part, we don't even talk about what is the American dream. And it's very different from when I was growing up. It's not redistributing opportunity. We can call it a wealth gap. You can call it an income gap. And so I think that if I was the President of the United States, or it has to come from the top, what I would do is recognize that this is a national emergency.
What about that? I mean, you look at the fight for $15 an hour. Do you think it's a national emergency? And then what about $15? The Journal's out with an op-ed this morning saying that there are hidden costs in the fight for 15.
Well, number one, the only way you could consider it a national emergency is if you ignore taxes and you ignore welfare benefits. That's the only way you could say that it's anywhere near an emergency, number one. Number two, $15 an hour is another thing that the economy is achieving without the government. We've got Amazon, Target. Target's promising to go to 15 by 2020. Amazon's already there. We have companies lifting their wages without the government's assistance. In fact, in many parts of the country, you could go to a $15 minimum wage today and it really wouldn't matter very much. The problem is when you have a one-size-fits-all solution, which is what the federal government comes up with, you really hurt lower economically developed areas of the country. For example, $15 an hour in San Francisco is a whole lot different than $15 an hour in Birmingham, Alabama. So you've got Democratic congressmen and women from these red states that aren't as economically advanced, who are worried about getting reelected, who are now opposing a national $15 minimum wage bill, and that makes a lot of sense.
That's what the editorial board writes, because they're talking about the effect of the higher minimum wage at $15 that it's having on jobs and crime. And the editorial writes, what does this say about the Democrats' idea for a nationwide $15 mandate? Economists write that this minimum wage hike would generate over 410,000 additional property crimes and $2.5 billion per year in additional crime costs. That's perhaps extrapolating past the horizon, yet the basic point holds. Democrats talk about $15 minimum wage with little thought to the unintended consequences. And you've written about this and talked about this as well.
Yeah, and Andy, I go to your former business and I'm a big fan of fast food. Tell America that right now. But the fact of the matter is, whenever I stop, there's always a help wanted sign in a store. So if you have a market-based solution, you'd expect that wages would rise because they can't find the talent. So why not just have a market-based solution?
Well, number one, a market-based solution is absolutely the best way to go. And just think back, just a couple of years ago, it's 2014, when President Obama was out saying we need a 10-10 minimum wage. It has to be 10-10. Well, you go to 10-10 today, nobody'd even notice. You can't hire people for $10 an hour anymore because the economy over the last 2 years has been growing so dynamically it's driven wages. If you are going to have a solution, the best way to do it's I would do it on a metropolitan basis, a citywide basis, because you've got a difference, for example, between San Francisco, California, which has very, very high wages, and Stockton, which is about 80 miles east of San Francisco, which is in bankruptcy or close to it. So you've really got different municipal wages would make a lot more sense. That, if not municipal, then state level. The federal minimum wage would really wreak havoc in areas that are economically underdeveloped at the moment, and we have some areas that are.
The irony, Andy, it's Dagan McDowell, the irony of what Ray Dalio is preaching is this is actually why President Trump got elected to the presidency, to the White House, is that he recognized that there were giant groups of people across this country who don't happen to live in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles, and maybe Chicago, who are forgotten by politicians, that they do want to be in charge of their own destiny, and they want to work hard, and they want those opportunities. It was President Trump speaking to those very people. That's what Ray Dalio doesn't seem to recognize.
Yeah, and not everything he says is wrong. I mean, there are some things in this 7,500-word essay that he had that are good points, but he ignores a bigger point. For example, both he and I, used to cut lawns and used to deliver papers, and we both lived the American dream. We're not dead yet. The American dream isn't dead. People can still live the American dream. That's just not true. Number one. And number two, there are ways to address the specific issues that he talks about without going towards more of a socialist-oriented government. And he wants to increase taxes. He wants government to go into partnership with businesses, which always ends up with the government running that business. And he wants the government to step in and redistribute wealth. Well, that's socialism, and you don't have to look very far around the world to see what the results are from countries that went from a capitalist system to a socialist system. They're a disaster.
What's the answer to get our hands around income inequality and help the situation then?
I think the kind of economic growth we're having right now is dynamically reducing income inequality. We are increasing wages. Look, we've got more Americans working than have ever worked. We've got more job openings than we've ever had, fewer people claiming unemployment benefits. We're seeing wages go up. We've got more people working. They're making more money. Because of tax cuts, they're taking more money home. I mean, these are the kinds of things that reduce income inequality, that provide the dignity and respect that work brings to an individual. These are the kind of things that drive an economy, drive a nation. That is the American dream. And I think we've got to take into consideration that we're being very successful at the moment at improving our economy and lives of Americans across all demographics.
No, I hope people feel better that people's taxes actually went up in New York and California and the blue states, that upper income individuals are paying more money to the federal government, not less.
That's absolutely right. That SALT deduction, in New York, 42% of the SALT deduction benefits went to 0.5% of the high earners in the state. Those are the people that are getting hit with these tax cuts. Middle and lower income Americans and working class Americans are benefiting, and you can see it in consumer spending and consumer confidence.
Yeah, you never hear that in the headlines. Andy, it's good to see you. Thanks so much.
Good to see you, Marie.
Andy Puzder joining us there. Coming up, rent the runway for your little one.